My name is Dr. Andrew Ledbetter, and I am an associate professor in the Department of Communication Studies, which is in the Bob Schieffer College of Communication. And my main area of research is on how people use communication technology to maintain their interpersonal relationships. I want to talk to you about that here today, and here today with me to talk about that is my student, Mandy Hendry.
Hi, I'm Mandy. I'm a graduate teaching assistant in the Communication Studies Department in the College of Communication.
That sounds good. Yeah, and Mandy has been a wonderful, I've known her as an undergrad. She's now a graduate student. She did an honors thesis with me. She's done a master's thesis with me. She's taken both my classes in social media. So I thought she'd be a great choice here to talk about some of my work, some of our work, really, along those lines. So.
Okay, well, the first question I have for you is, what exactly inspired you to research how people maintain relationships through online communication?
You know, it's interesting thinking back about my own history with this. It really goes back a long way for me. My dad worked for IBM for a number of years, and when I was very young, about fourth grade or so, he brought home an online service subscription to a service called Prodigy, which is kind of like a precursor to what we have today on the internet. It wasn't as worldwide, but you could get on, you could get news, you could play games. And really, the main attraction of the site is you could actually talk to people. You'd get on, you could email, you'd get on discussion boards, you could talk about all kinds of topics. And back in the late 80s, that was just mind-blowing to me as a kid, that I could get on and I could build friendships with people all around the country. As a boy living in Oregon, I could meet people living in Pittsburgh and living in Illinois and living in Texas and in a variety of places. And that experience from an early age really stuck with me and got me interested in, okay, how do we use these technologies to reach out and build relationships with other people? So, of course, as time went on, the World Wide Web developed. This became not such a strange thing that we get on and interact with other people. And by that time, I was in college, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do for the future. And one summer, my mentor, Dr. M. Griffin at Wheaton College, was working on his textbook and said to me, "Hey, Andrew, do you want to go and do some research during the summer to try to look and try to find some theories of online communication that are out there as this technology becomes big?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds really fun." So I spent that summer, a good part of it, in the library researching those theories, and I thought, wow, there are people actually studying this thing that I find to be very interesting and very important, and in fact is growing in importance over time. So at that point, I decided to go to graduate school to study that and to identify, hey, how do we use that technology to maintain our relationships? So that's kind of the brief story of how I became interested in this.
Well, that's awesome that it came out of your own personal experience and that you have a personal interest in it. So
I think for most researchers, there is some connection, to what we research. And
well, talking about research, though, why is it important to do research?
Well, and that's the thing, right? You can be interested in it, but does anybody else care, right? And in this case, I think we need to care because, let's face it, all of us are doing this. Well, all is a strong word. I'm sure there's some people in a cave somewhere that aren't on the internet and aren't, connecting with other people. But most of us, whether it's email, whether it's social media, texting, this touches our lives. We're using this technology. And there's a lot of questions about, is this good for us? Is this bad for us? How can we do it well? How can we do it effectively? And it's an ever-moving target, right? So once we understand one technology, well, guess what? The next technology is coming along. So if we can develop some broader theories that help us understand how people maintain relationships through the technology, hopefully that can persist over time and help us communicate and maintain our relationships more effectively as we move into the future with this ever-changing technological landscape.
Got it. Well, why is social media still popular today, though?
Well, I was just reviewing this for my class that I'm teaching this afternoon, and we're actually going to be talking about the early days of social media. And if you think back to 2004, when Mark Zuckerberg launched Facebook, and it was college only, and if you didn't have a college email address, you were on the outside, and then you move on a few years, and you get Twitter, and you get many different social networking sites launching at that point. It really took off quickly. Right? If we go back even, it's 2016, so you go back 15 years, social media wasn't really a thing, and now it's a huge thing. It's something that impacts interpersonal relationships. It's something that impacts business. It's something that impacts international politics, the course of the election that we've had this year and so forth. So why have we gotten on that so quickly? Well, I think, like some communication scholars have pointed out, we have this fundamental human need to connect with each other. Right. And we really find a way to do that regardless of the technology that we have. And so I think when you have this technology developed that wow, lets you connect with old high school classmates and people you knew from your hometown and people that have moved away, I think there's an inherent appeal to that really strikes us at the core of what it means to be a human being. So I think that's why that technology has taken off so quickly, is it fulfills that need, and it does it in a way that's very efficient.
Right. Well, why is social media, or how is social media different from earlier forms of technology then, like email and things like that?
Yeah, so you think about the history here, right? You kind of go back to antiquity, we developed writing, and then a lot later we developed the telephone, and then we developed computers and developed email. So there's a lot of technologies that lead up to social media. It's not that social media, boom, just descended from the sky out of nowhere. We had a bunch of technologies before that are still around. You know, I still spend probably too much of my day as a professor on email. So how does that differ from getting on Facebook, which I also do probably more than I should as well, although it's research. It's part of it. And hey, I have the excuse, it's what I study. I need to understand what's going on there. But I think one of the big differences is when you write an email, let's make it personal. When I write an email, if I write an email to you, all that's in that email is what I put in there. Nobody else can come and comment on my email. They can't add a photo to my email. I could add a photo to my email, but nobody else is coming along and changing that message. Social media is different. Social media, kind of the point is, when I post a Facebook status message, yeah, I control what's in that message, but then other people pile on. And pile on is kind of negative, but they come and they comment, maybe they pile on, I don't know, but they come and they comment, they like it,
right,
or they love it, or they sad it. I'm not sure what the verbs are now that Facebook has changed some of that. But they post tagged photos of me that maybe I like, maybe I don't like. So there's a lot less control when we're on social media. It's very public. Email, instant messenger, those are private, those are controlled. Facebook, social media are much more public and much less controlled.
Right.
Now, I think it is worth noting that's how social media generally works. Yeah, you can have a Twitter account where all your tweets are protected. You can put your Facebook in lockdown mode where it's very hyper-controlled. But again, that's not the point, and that's not using its technology to its fullest extent. And let's be honest, most of us don't do that. Most of us have rather, to varying degrees, publicly accessible profiles. And again, that's kind of the point. So that makes that technology very different than, say, email, where you control what you send, and only you.
Very cool. Well, many people are concerned about how communication technology might harm our relationships. So do you think it helps or hurts our social lives?
That's a key question, isn't it? I mean, that's something we hear a lot, and we've heard it for a long time.
Right.
So if you go back even 20 years ago, people were raising these questions. Are we going to become all digital? Are we going to get to a point where we lose our humanity, where I feel like I can't even connect face-to-face because I'm so used to connecting through the computer? It's funny, I've been watching an old sitcom with my kids from about that time frame, about 20 years ago, and it's just amazing how they portray computer nerds back in the 90s. They're losers, and they're geeks, and they're not cool, and not the people you want to hang out with. So there's kind of been this stigma around computers that's existed for a long time. And I think part of that comes from, if you go back into, say, the 80s, the people that were connecting through the computer. I guess I'm kind of in that category since I kind of outed myself here. We're kind of nerdy folks. I mean, but we can look back and say, hey, they're on the cutting edge. I mean, oftentimes people that are a bit more awkward kind of try things out ahead of time, and then the rest of us pick up on what's successful later on. So these kinds of questions, this kind of stigma has been around for a long time. So then we fast forward to the present day. It's not really nerdy to be on Facebook at all. In fact, that's a very common, popular thing to do. But then we have experiences like a couple of years ago, my wife and I were in a restaurant, and we were on a date and just spending time together. And we turn, and the table next to us, there's a family of four. As I remember, it was a mom and a dad, and I think a son and a daughter. And they were all sitting around the table, and they were all on their devices. I think you had mom and dad on their phones, you had the daughter on her tablet, you had the son on his Nintendo 3DS. And it kind of made me scratch my head and think, wow, this is why we go out to eat, is so we don't have to prepare the meal, we don't have to clean up, we can just sit and use that time instead to connect with each other and enjoy our company. But in this case, they were tuned into their devices.
Right.
Now, I probably shouldn't be Captain Judgy Pants here, and I don't know what they were doing. Maybe they were connecting with other people that were meaningful to them. Maybe they had a hard day. Maybe there could have been a variety of reasons why they were doing that. But when I talk to my college students, I understand that this is something that they struggle with as well. They go out to eat and spend time together, and they're all on their phones. They're not connecting with each other.
Right.
So I think this concern that it can harm our relationships is a very real concern, and we can see cases of that. But here's the bottom line in terms of research, and this has been researched a ton. I've done research along these lines. Many other scholars have. And generally we find that the general effect, the overall effect is positive. So for instance, those that are connecting online also tend to connect with others offline. So if you have a lot of friends online, you probably have a lot of friends offline.
Right.
And within specific relationships. So let's say that you and I start emailing back and forth more, or Facebooking more. That's probably, the research suggests, going to enhance the quality of our friendship, for instance. So it seems that the net effect is generally positive. So can we look at negative cases? Yeah. Are those negative cases something that should concern us? Definitely. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that, hey, this technology does seem to connect us, and it does seem to overall, in general, improve the quality of our relationships and improve the quality of our social networks overall. So I don't know if that's getting at what you're asking.
No, definitely. Thank you. Although I do have another question for that. If it generally helps and improves our social lives, then why are there so many examples of people just being rude and mean and nasty online?
Yeah, I mean, that's not hard to find either, right? You go to any given YouTube video, or here in an election year, you go to any political news story, you even go to candidates' own Twitter feeds, you can find evidence of people being mean and nasty and rude. I think the first thing I'd say is, well, think about face-to-face communication. Can we find people communicating face-to-face in ways that are rude?
Yes.
Absolutely. You go to certain bars at certain hours, you go to certain sporting events that may be very high tension. Boy, sometimes you go to people's homes on any given night, and you'll hear face-to-face communication that's very rude indeed. So we don't then turn around though and say, oh, that face-to-face communication, it's awful. How dare anybody talk face-to-face?
Never do that again.
Face-to-face is just miserable, awful. I mean, we don't do that, right? So in some sense, I think online communication gets a bad rap. We're still human beings when we get online, so we do the very human thing of being ugly and rude and mean. And yes, we should try not to do that, but again, we're human beings, and that happens. So I think that there's that overall effect. But then I think we can also ask the question, are there things about communicating online that can exacerbate that tendency?
Right.
Certainly there are things I've seen posted online on a YouTube video or whatnot that I think, okay, if they were face-to-face, I hope they wouldn't make that comment. I hope they wouldn't say that thing. And I think that there is. And some scholars have talked about this in terms of the lack of nonverbal cues can make us less aware of the other person. As one of my professors put it when I was in college, it decreases the ethical distance between us and the other person, or rather increases it, so we don't feel as much of a need to treat that person, as a human being worthy of dignity and respect. When we're not directly aware of the fact that they're another human being, it feels like we're just talking through the terminal. And again, I want to couch this in saying this is not everybody all the time. It's not that online communication forces us to communicate that way. We still make the choice to ignore what we know about communicating with other people in an ethical way. But when the other person is not right there with us like we are right now, it can be much more easier just to kind of dash off a nasty email or nasty comment, and then you kind of write them off and you wipe your hands of it. And hopefully later you think, okay, that was not nice. But sometimes that technology, I think, can foster that as well.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, are there some people then who are maybe more at risk for having negative outcomes through the use of things like technology and social media than others?
Yeah, the research suggests that there is. And particularly what the research has identified is those that are at risk are those that have trouble controlling their use of the technology. So for many of us, you use the technology and you put it away and it's done. But for other people, and all of us probably, all is a strong word, many of us have that sense that, okay, wow, we find ourselves unconsciously attracted to the technology. So I know I do this sometimes where I'm bored and I whip out my phone and I'm opening up my Facebook even before I think about it.
Yes.
So for some people, that's just, okay, we do that now and then when we're bored. But for some people, that's a compulsion. That's where they feel like they're really missing out if they're not online, and when they get online, they can't control their behavior. They can't control themselves enough to remove themselves from the technology and go do other things. Now,
Right.
some people have called that an addiction. I think that's debatable, whether it's an addiction like other sorts of addictive things, like substance use. But still, it's certainly, whether you want to call it an addiction or not, it's still a social concern, especially when it gets to the point, as it does for some people, where it's impacting the quality of their other relationships, their marriage, their family, their ability to keep a job. And we see this sometimes with things like massively multiplayer online games, where people get so engrossed in World of Warcraft that they're spending hours and hours on that. And that's been a social problem in places like South Korea in particular. So, that kind of inability to control your use of the technology is where kind of the red flag really comes up to say, okay, this is something you want to get checked out and deal with. But most of us aren't there. Maybe we all have a little bit of a mild form of that, many of us. But when it gets to that extreme where it's impacting the other areas of your life, that's where you want to be concerned.
So it's a much smaller subset then, in other words.
It is, yeah. This is not, oh man, everybody on the street is doing this that I need. It's a smaller set of people that would be prone to that.
Okay. Well, now I know that you recently did a study on how mothers use Facebook, and what did your study find? Yeah,
so that's a good segue into this, because we looked at that question of mental health of mothers. So I'm a parent myself, and I know that you are as well. And raising kids is great, but it can be stressful. There are a lot of stressful things about raising kids, particularly when kids are really young and can't care for themselves. And many of the mothers in our sample, so we recruited a sample of several hundred mothers. I forget the exact number off the top of my head, but I think about 180 or so mothers. And they completed a survey talking about their Facebook use. They also reported on their mental health. They also reported on some aspects of their family, such as their income and the number of kids.
Right.
And we found that mothers that have more income have better mental health. Kind of makes sense. Some of the pressures of life are increased if you don't have money to cope with them. We also found, and I found this kind of amusing in a dark way, that those mothers that have more kids tend to have worse mental health. I love my kids. They're a blessing. So hi, kids, if you're watching this. But, you get more kids. There's more stress. There's more things to do. It kind of makes sense how that might make you more depressed, anxious, and so forth. But then we also found that, in turn, mothers that have worse mental health are more likely to use Facebook. Say it again. Mothers that have worse mental health were more likely to use Facebook. Now, I want to be careful in how I frame this, because I don't think the conclusion of this study is, wow, Facebook ruins mothers' mental health. I don't think, with the data we have, we can't claim that.
Right.
We can simply observe, okay, mothers that have worse mental health tend to be more likely to use Facebook. Those with better mental health are less likely. I kind of wonder if maybe it's not so much that Facebook is causing any kind of decrease or increase perhaps in mental health, but rather it's a coping mechanism.
Right.
So if you're a mother and you have young kids, and maybe you're a stay-at-home mother, or maybe you're a mother that works in some capacity, whatever reason you're at home with your kids, that can be a very isolating thing.
Yeah.
And you feel stressed, taking care of your children and so forth. So maybe you turn to Facebook as that social outlet. And that's the way you connect with other adults and get some kind of reprieve from some of the monotony of raising children.
That would make
sense. I think an interesting follow-up would be to see what happens over time. So does that help these mothers? Maybe they get better. Maybe they can reach out and get some relief, get some support through the technology, and then they feel better. Or it could be the other way around. Maybe they think it helps them get better, but it ends up that it doesn't, and it distracts them from actually coping in perhaps ways that might be more helpful. We also found it depended on the mother's attitude toward the technology. So if mom enjoyed Facebook when she had poor mental health, she would turn to Facebook and use that. But if she didn't enjoy Facebook, she wouldn't, which I think further strengthens my claim that, hey, this isn't Facebook causing mental health. This is women who are stressed and are feeling down choosing to use that technology if they enjoy it. I imagine mothers that don't enjoy Facebook, maybe if they enjoy some other site, they turn to that site. Maybe if they enjoy a good book, they pick up a good book. It's probably just at that point choosing whatever will help you cope with the stress that you're experiencing. So that's what we found there. I think there's a lot more questions to ask about how Facebook fits into to how parents raise their children, both in their own use and then also the use of their children.
Oh, certainly. I know those are big concerns going on these days. But in addition to your research with mothers, I know that you've also done some research looking at technology and extended families. So how do extended families use technology to maintain relationships, sometimes even across long distances?
Yeah, and I think that's a fascinating area of research. I know for me and my own family, connecting with some of my extended family that are back in the state I grew up in has been wonderful to connect with them and maintain those bonds, and they can see pictures of my kids, and I mean, it's a wonderful thing. I love it in my own life. And in the research that we did, we kind of found similar in a way. So we did an experiment where we had people imagine, okay, what would happen if a relative contacts you through a technology that you're not expecting? Okay. So maybe, Uncle Dan suddenly texts me, or maybe Grandma Jane suddenly contacts me on Facebook in some way. How would I react to that? Is that a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? Is it an expected thing? Is it unexpected? Is it important? Is it not? So this was with one of my former grad students, Sam Taylor, who is now a graduate student at Cornell, getting his doctorate looking at these kinds of things. And this is for his master's thesis work, and it's now in press at a international journal, kind of like your own honors thesis work, if I can plug you here.
Thank you.
He did some great work on family communication. But it's what we do at TCU. We train students to do good research, and then they actually go out and contribute that to the scholarly community. But anyway, he looked at extended family in his work, and what he found was that we generally see that as a positive thing, even if it's a relative we actually don't even like all that much. So he asked, okay, as you think about this relative, are they somebody that's satisfying to communicate with or not? And he found, this kind of blows my mind, that you were not as happy if it was a relative that you don't like. So, if it's wonderful Aunt Susie that contacts you, that's great. If it's creepy Aunt Susie that contacts you, that's not as good, but it's still positive. So it's still positive. So even though it reduced how positive that is, it was still a positive thing, which I think further enhances the claim I'm making here that this technology, again, it tends to connect us, and that's a basic human drive, and as we do that, that tends to improve the quality of our relationships, and typically as we improve the quality of our relationships, that's improving our health and our well-being overall. So, again, it seems like this is a case where the technology is helping our extended family relationships. It's a very new area of study. We actually don't have much knowledge of extended family relationships overall, as you know from your own work looking at that. So looking at that with technology is entirely new, but at least in this initial study, it also confirms some theories that we are working with. But it seems that it's a good thing for extended family and helps them connect. Although how satisfying that relative is might shape how positive that is.
Okay. So it looks like then that social media does have a generally positive influence on families, as far as you can tell, for better or worse?
Generally so. I think, again, you always, when you're talking about positive or negative effects, you have to kind of put an asterisk there and say it depends on some other things. I've also done some work looking at privacy invasions through technology. So there's a lot of people that talk about helicopter parents.
Yes.
Excuse me if you're not familiar with that term. Those are parents that hover over their kids and make sure that their pathway through life is clear and they don't have any problems at college and they don't have any problems in the workplace. And I don't know how much farther into the future that goes. I think that's not a healthy thing for parents to be doing at the college level, probably not even at the high school level as much as some parents tend to do. But we know that this happens. We know that college students sometimes value their privacy, and technology can be a threat to that. So did some research looking at that and found, indeed, that parents do engage in those kinds of privacy invasions. So maybe they creep on their kid's Facebook profile, or they text them too much, or they ask embarrassing questions to the technology. So parents, try to use the technology to kind of creep on their kids and invade their privacy. But we also found really a bigger finding than that I think helps us understand that finding, and that's that compared to, say, the 1980s, we're doing a lot of 80s comments on this conversation.
Hey, that was a good decade. It's fine.
I'm a fan of the 80s, and I know you are too. But anyway, compared to the 80s, so think back to the 80s, right? If you're a college student in the 80s, you don't have the internet, you don't have texting, you're paying long distance to call mom and dad if you're out of state. I mean, things were much different. You kind of went to college and you were away, and there was a very limited, some phone contact, some postal mail contact, but generally that was a separation, between the student and the parent. And back in the 80s, college students seemed to be really sensitive. We go back to look at some of the research done at that time. students perceived invasions as happening frequently, and that seemed to be a very bothersome thing to them, that they all saw their parents as trying to invade their privacy in some way. But if you fast forward a couple of decades, when we have this technology, and ironically, parents can use that technology to invade children's lives even more, they don't report as many privacy invasions. So even though parents can do that, and at times that bothers them, generally they don't feel like their parents invade their privacy as much as children and parents of a previous generation.
Is that just because they've gotten used to the fact that that's kind of always there and always a possibility versus it just wasn't at the time? Or
I think so. I think it's, they're used to the fact that their parents can text them, that maybe they have an app the parents can check where they are, they can get on social media. Yeah, I think they're used to that. So when they go to college, it's kind of like, okay, all that just kind of continues. Maybe it reduces a little bit, but it's just kind of what we've always done as a family. Whereas in the past, you had a certain mode of communicating with your parents in your family of origin through high school, but then you go to college, and something, boom, that radically changes. And parents probably don't know what to do, and maybe they're nagging a bit too much in terms of their phone calls and things like that. And so the kids react to that, the college students react to that. So that's my own thinking of it right now, is that students are just used to the fact that they're so connected to their parents. And let's be honest, they often enjoy that. And there can be some real benefits to that, certainly emotionally and relationally. Who doesn't want a healthy parent-child relationship at any age? That's great. I think where it would concern me is when it limits the college student's ability to grow into a healthy, functioning adult. So if they're perpetually financially dependent, or if they don't feel like they can make decisions on their own without turning to their parents, there's a point as a parent we need to say, okay, you got this, I've raised you, you go. I mean, that needs to happen at an earlier age. I do that with my daughter, who's much younger sometimes. So if it gets to that point where the child is too dependent on the parent, that can be a problem. But otherwise, that can be a healthy thing.
Okay, so we've just been talking about this in terms of families, but what about friendships? Does social media really help long-distance friends stay close, just like it does with families, or?
Yeah, so most of my work has been on families or on friendships, and with friendships, we do find, people, in some sense that sounds like stating the obvious, that yes, people maintain long-distance friendships, but it's a different thing to engage in research that tries to isolate exactly how powerful that effect is, if that is even what happens at all.
Right.
And yes, it is indeed what happens. And a scholar, a communication scholar, Joseph Walter, who's a big name, one of the pioneers in online communication research, a couple decades ago identified sort of a 4-to-1 ratio. So what that 4-to-1 ratio means is that in the amount of time that we could get to know each other face to face, so let's say we talk for an hour, we would need about 4 hours to get to know each other as well through the technology, because there's not as many nonverbal cues and it takes more time to get to know each other.
Right.
Well, in a recent study looking at how people reduce uncertainty in their friendships, we also found that 4-to-1 ratio. So, face-to-face communication does reduce that uncertainty more quickly, so I can get to know you better is basically what that means for face-to-face, and that makes sense. I mean, there's all kinds of nonverbal cues that leap out at me. I can see your facial expressions. I can, we can get to know each other more quickly. But it's not that the technology doesn't reduce that uncertainty. It just seems to do it a little bit less potently. So it takes more time to go back and forth in terms of our messages to get to know each other and develop the relationship. So the research supports in some sense what we already know intuitively, that we do maintain these friendships through the technology, but it also clarifies for us exactly how potent that is and exactly the kinds of behaviors we can engage in to do that.
Great. Well, I know you've been working with a new theory called media multiplexity theory.
Yes.
Yes, which we all enjoy talking about in class, yes. Could you explain how
I'm glad you say that, because sometimes I wonder if my students do or not, but,
well, I can't
as passionate as I am
can't speak for all
so.
Students. I just know that I personally enjoy it, so I don't want to be
I will take that as
for everyone.
praise, so,
I like it. But anyway, can you explain how that theory, though, helps us understand how social media shapes interpersonal relationships?
Yeah, so media multiplexity theory, that's where a lot of my research is at right now, trying to identify and develop a theory that will help us understand how do we use this technology overall, across technologies, to maintain our relationships.
Right.
So let me take a step back on that. So a lot of our theorizing so far has looked at specific channels.
Okay.
So if we switch from talking face-to-face to email, what does that do to our relationship? Or why might we choose to send an email rather than a text message in a given situation? So it looks at, the research looks at one medium in isolation, or it compares it to some other medium, so kind of medium versus medium comparisons. It's a different question to take a step back and say, as most of us do, wow, we use a whole bunch of different communication technologies in our relationships. So, particularly for relationships that are close. So
right.
In one relationship, sometimes we're talking face-to-face, sometimes we're emailing, sometimes we're Facebooking, sometimes we're Snapchatting, sometimes we're texting. I mean, we have, it almost feels unlimited. It's not unlimited technically, I guess, but it feels like we have an unlimited ways to connect with each other through technology, if indeed that's something that we want to do. So how do we take all this menu, this buffet of options we have for communicating, how do we take all these options and weave them together into a coherent interpersonal relationship? That's the kind of question that we're asking, but it's a question we don't have a really good answer for yet. Media multiplexity theory is a tentative attempt to get at some of that and explain that. And so far, what media multiplexity theory suggests is the more communication media we use, the closer we tend to be. So, for example, in communicating with my wife, I probably use about 6 or 7 different media with her. I text her about what she wants me to pick up at the grocery store.
Right.
I send her an IM to ask how her day is going. I like something she posted on Facebook. So, that's an example of a strong tie relationship, a close relationship. We need a bunch of different media in order to sustain the things that we do in the course of that relationship. Whereas a relationship that is not as close, which some scholars call a weak tie, doesn't nearly need as many it doesn't need as many communication channels, doesn't need the same number of channels as a stronger tie does.
Right.
So if it's a classmate, maybe that class is the only time you see that person, and that's all you ever need to see that person. It's maybe an acquaintance, but it's not somebody you know well. You're not going to connect through a bunch of different communication technologies. So that's the basics of media multiplexity theory. I feel like I'm forgetting part of the last part of your question there.
It was just understanding how it helps shape interpersonal relationships. So I think you,
Okay.
I think you definitely
I think that kind of
got on that.
Yeah. So the basic idea is the closer we are, the more media we tend to use. The last piece I mentioned, though, is it also depends on the groups that we're a part of. So relationships, oftentimes, not always, but much of the time, are embedded in broader groups or organizations.
Right.
So to just give you an example here at TCU, TCU gives all of us an email address.
Yes.
Okay, so TCU is kind of saying, you have our blessing to use email. In fact, TCU tells students you need to check your email because that's how you're going to hear from professors and from the university and things like that, right? So that's the organization saying email is something that we're going to do. I've also been a part of, for instance, a church group where Facebook is what we had set up. And
right.
That Facebook group is where we interacted with the group, so the group kind of gives its blessing to that channel for interacting. So that can also shape those patterns when we have groups or organizations saying, hey, use this medium, or maybe in some cases don't use this medium. These are the preferred channels that we have for interacting with each other. So those can trump some of those individual preferences for media that we have.
I find it interesting that you're talking about the individual preferences and how some groups choose to use Facebook and things to stay connected, because I know that some people like Facebook and some people hate it. So why do some people then have more positive attitudes toward technology than others do, especially in light of all the benefits that you've talked about today?
Yeah, so my dissertation research was on just that topic, on the fact that, hey, we feel differently about different media, and I continued that forward in a research program that is still ongoing today. So some people, as you mentioned, love Facebook. I like Facebook quite a bit. I see you on Facebook quite a bit. People like us seem to like Facebook, but then there are other people that really don't like Facebook that much. Maybe they like Snapchat more. Maybe they like some other technology. Just to be honest with you, and I think you know this about me, I am not much of a phone talker. I'll talk on the phone to people I'm close to.
Same here.
But, just going home and spending hours chatting up people on the phone is, I don't know, it's not my first inclination. Even when I have to call to get something done, if I can get on the web and do it quickly, I'd rather do that. Whereas I know other people are like, oh, let me pick up the phone. I need that human connection. I need to feel like I'm talking to a real live human being and not a machine. So it just struck me as I was thinking about my dissertation, what do? We have these, some people like technology, some people don't. Where does that come from? How does that work? So far, just to briefly sketch some of the things I found, it does seem to have to do with your family of origin to some extent. So for instance, families that have more rules and conformity seem to produce children that are more inclined to use online communication, for instance. So that seems to have something to do with it. It also seems to have something to do with your surrounding social environment. So if I'm around a bunch of people that love Facebook, it's more likely that I will love Facebook. And this is not determinism, right? So
Right.
I mean, I could still be in a crowd that loves Facebook and hate it, but generally, if our social environment, if it's people we know like a technology or don't like a technology, we kind of assimilate their attitudes toward it to a certain extent. And then also our experience with the technology. So if I feel like I'm competent when I use the technology, if I feel like I express myself well, then that's going to develop a more positive attitude toward the technology. I've also found in several studies that those attitudes really do predict our use of the technology. So if I feel more positively about the technology, I'm going to use it more. That's kind of, I mean, there's many more nuanced findings beneath that, but that's kind of the broad overview of what I've found so far.
So with so many different attitudes about the technology and things, when does technology kind of help pull us together and when does it pull us apart?
Yeah, well, that's the big question, and I think this is in contrast to something I can say, well, in my study I found this. I think this is where we need to go next in research, is answering that kind of question. So, for instance, I did this, I guess I will talk about one study. I did looking, this is one of my favorite studies, in part because I do enjoy video games in my spare time, but it was a study that a grad student of mine at Ohio University wanted to do, looking at how people maintain relationships through the Xbox Live gaming service. So we surveyed about 200 Xbox Live users, people that played Halo largely. I think it was Halo 3 was the popular one at the time. And we found, looking at their survey responses, that yeah, these Halo players, when they thought of a friend that they played with frequently, and they reported on their communication with that person, and we found that yeah, if they're engaging in relationally oriented talk with those friends through Halo, that is positively impacting their closeness, even above and beyond other forms of contact they have with that person. So you think about that media multiplexity, right? That could be, hey, go play some Halo with a friend and talk to them, and that'll make your relationship closer. So it's not even some of the more traditional communication media we talk about. It could be something that's more, I don't know if I want to say alternative, because millions of people play Xbox Live in games, but something that we don't think of as maybe quite as mainstream as something like email. But you know, given what else we know about video games, though, we know that they can be addictive. They can be, I don't know, addictive is a strong word, but they can be very engrossing. They can take a lot of time. So is it possible that as you play Halo, you are connecting with that friend and you're getting a really close friendship, maybe even a romantic relationship with another player or whatever, but the rest of your life is falling apart? Right? So maybe you're losing your offline friends, maybe your family is losing touch with you, maybe you can't hold a job. I mean, I could imagine that. I could imagine, and
definitely
that could be part of that trap, right? I'm so engrossed in the relationships I have online that I'm letting things fall apart around me. But so far, we have some research that documents some of those, problematic internet use effects. We have a lot of research that shows the positive benefits of communicating online, but we haven't really linked those things together in the way we need to understand, okay, how can we maximize those benefits for relationships of communicating online while minimizing the downsides that can happen when it detracts from other things.
Certainly.
So I don't know if that gets it.
No, that definitely does. Since we are, though, here in a university setting, I'd like to go ahead and bring technology back to kind of this context and this setting, because I know that you and Dr. Finn have done some work on communication technology in the classroom. So how should instructors then address the presence of laptops, tablets, and smartphones? Because we all know that the students walk in with them on a daily basis, and they all have them.
Yeah, they do. So just got to give a shout out to my TCU colleague, Dr. Amber Finn, who is also an associate professor in the same department that I am. And one day, about 4 years ago, we were just talking to each other, and she's an instructional communication scholar. She looks at how teachers and students communicate in the classroom. And I was talking about my interest in communication technology, and we realized, we can bring these two things together because this is a very exigent problem in any given college classroom.
Oh, yeah.
The technology's coming in, and as an instructor, what do I do about it? Do I allow it? Do I regulate it in some way? Do I ban it? Do I try to supervise it? And what are the consequences of all those decisions? So we realized, I think there's some real topics here that we could bring together, our research interests, and also help us practically as teachers figure out how to use this effectively in the classroom. So we now have a series of studies that we've done on that. And overall, we have found that, you know what, teachers actually can either encourage or discourage the technology effectively.
Okay.
So I think we kind of assume, okay, students love the tech, and if we say, no, put it away, they'll instantly react negatively and get upset at the teacher. And we have found some evidence that that can happen.
Right.
But we've also found evidence that when teachers are directing those policies at the social use of the technology, students, lo and behold, several of them actually like that.
Interesting.
I think part of that might be their own use. They don't want to have the opportunity to be distracted through the technology. Part of that may be the use of other people. So it's distracting even if I'm not on Facebook during class. If I can see the person in front of me and two rows down is, getting on Facebook or getting on some other, something not related to the class, that can distract me. And there's some other
Certainly.
research, not ours, but other research that has found that can actually affect the learning of other people in the classroom.
Right.
So it seems that teachers can regulate technology without making students too upset about it. But as they do so, the other thing we found is that students absolutely need to be clear about what the policies are. So the worst thing that a teacher can do in regards to technology is to be vague about their policies. Students do not like it when a teacher says, okay, you can use it, but then they maybe send some mixed messages about not using it later. Or they say, don't use it, and then they don't regulate those policies. When they get in that kind of middle zone where it's not clear, that produces a negative reaction from students. So as long as teachers are clear whether they encourage it and allow it for course purposes or discourage it, that's really kind of in the instructor's purview, but clarity is important.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you answering that question and all the other questions today about your research and what you're looking at here at TCU. So thank you so much for doing that today.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the questions and appreciate the opportunity here to talk about the research.
Absolutely. Okay.